Okay, so welcome back. We are starting the expert discussion panel now. The title of this panel is Shaping Biodiversity, Nature's Course or Ours. So our moderator today is John Taylor, and yeah, and he has a list of questions, and he may also go off the rails, but I think it's going to be a really exciting discussion. The panelists are Dr. Werner Kunz, Dr. Genevieve Housman, Dr. Markus Klaus, and Dr. Irina Roof. So take it away, have fun, and then towards the end of the discussion panel, there will also be an audience engagement session. So, all right.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it sounds like this is working. My job here is to draw as much of the expertise as possible out of these four better minds than mine joining me up here to try and steer it through, to try and involve you guys as much as possible, because we have an enormous amount of expertise up on the stage here, but also in the audience. So the perfect end result is a brilliant debate where we all have fascinating discussion and come out of here with ideas that we didn't have now. And those who have met me this morning will realize that my other challenge is keeping my own mouth shut. But my job is only to steer on this occasion. As Idu just said, the discussion is framed as shaping biodiversity, nature's course or ours. We've been discussing this. We are very aware that some people may absolutely want to take that framing, and some people may want to take the framing that we're in such an Anthropocene, human-formed world now that nature's course is quite difficult to guess at. But I would challenge our panelists that if that's the view, then it's perfectly understandable. But if we're in the driving seat, how should we drive? We can still be honourable to the framing here, even if the immediate question is easy to answer. Let's just kick off to my left with the first question and hand over to the people who know what they're talking about. By conserving species in zoos, are we inadvertently selecting for traits that may hinder their survival in the wild? Over to you. Who'd like to go first, or shall I just pass the mic?
I think this is very important because a lot of animal species are dying today. We lose a lot of species every day. And to prevent this, it is necessary to rear and culture species under artificial conditions and to wait when they can be released, because otherwise they will be extincted.
Yeah, I think I echo that opinion as well. I think it really depends when we think about traits and whether they are adaptive or not adaptive in a zoo or outside of a zoo. It really depends on the context. There's a lot of trait variation that exists in nature, and we never really know what selection is acting on. One day it might be selecting on one trait, it might be selecting on something different the next day. And so there's a lot of stuff going on, and I think us assuming that we know the exact trait that is fit for an environment is a little presumptuous of us. And so I agree that, yeah, conserving any traits as opposed to no traits is something, so.
Okay. So I fully support breeding animals in zoos for several reasons, but we all should be aware that there is trait selection, definitely. And it's even hidden trait selection, so you would certainly know much more about it than me. But how do you know if an offspring has some mutations in its genomes that might be not affecting any visible phenotype trait, yeah? But the next generation or after that, the generation that might cause some malformations or disorders. And that would decrease fitness of the animal. And in the zoo, you would say, okay, I will not breed anymore with this individual, or I will treat it, so the vet will come in and treat it, this disorder. But in the wild, of course, this animal would already be selected, maybe not even become mature and breed. Yeah. So, and I think we should be aware we are producing species with specific traits that might be not visible or unknown to us that might decrease or maybe even increase fitness in a natural environment, whatever natural means and is. So just an example, I don't want to stress it now, we maybe can discuss it later, but it is quite well known that lions in zoos very often show a specific disorder called stargazing, which might be related to an hypovitaminose A, and it's only in lions, but not, it's very rare in other big cats. Why? There must be a kind of predisposition to it. A natural predisposition, probably.
Okay, so my take on something like this would be that I don't like that kinds of questions that use very absolute statements, because most of the stuff we do as humans is messy, but the alternative to an absolute statement like this would be not to do it. And in my view, that would be depauperization of our planet. The thing is, it is unavoidable to cause these shifts in the genome, in the phenotypes, whatever. You should be aware that I think the zoo community goes to some lengths to counter that. It is unavoidable, but still there's something like studwood management, there's attempts to keep genetic diversity high, completely different from how we manage our domestic animals that we're managing. And when you want to release animals into the wild, you will make programs like soft releases to make sure that maybe even different generations before you get them out, you will find solutions to that. So I would say just because that statement is true, it doesn't mean anything.
You pointed out this morning that we are often keeping animals in conditions that they would not encounter in the wild. We're keeping animals that would normally be solitary in groups. We're feeding animals on food that they wouldn't normally encounter. Are we, I'm not a zoo breeding program manager, are we selecting animals that favour those unnatural conditions? They behave better in groups, or they seem to be healthy on all the completely unnatural fruit that we're giving them. Therefore, we select for those animals in the breeding programs, and therefore are selecting animals that might do better in a very artificial zoo situation. But if we were ever to be able to reintroduce them to safe habitats, these things would not serve them well. Is that a problem, or does it fade into insignificance in the bigger picture? Any of you?
What means natural habitat? Europe is different from the whole other world because nature was manipulated and managed since the last 10,000 years. And I have been 16 times in Africa. The last time I have been there 2 years ago. And I remember the Nakuru National Park. The Nakuru National has a fence around the whole district. And when you want to see a lion, you have to look where the cars are parking. There you find a lion. These are not natural conditions at all.
Anyone else have a view on that one, or?
Well, I can just comment. I mean, as you all saw from my talk, I'm very focused on cell culture. And I mean, even in cell culture, there are selective processes happening, whether intentional or not. You are passaging cells from dish to dish, and the ones that survive are the ones that grow. And nobody in medicine thinks that you can take a cell from a patient, grow it in a petri dish, and then just inject it back into the body and assume that it will behave as it once behaved before. So that's at a cellular level. I can only imagine at the organismal level what it becomes even more complicated.
But again, I would say in this context that there is progress, or there is slow changes, because like you saw with cheetahs, in the end we started being able to breed cheetahs, whereas there was a time when people couldn't. Whereas there is understanding that some species need the solitariness. There was a time when I grew up, I thought orangutan was a single species, and now there's progress. And then you start correcting stuff. And I mean, that is, I think, what most of us are about when we're talking about zoo husbandry. We want to make these corrections and more corrections and more corrections.
Yeah, so I would like to make a statement that might be not my personal opinion, but maybe it's not the worst that we are doing some kind of selection, and when you release these animals, they might be better prepared to the world outside, and they are used to humans, and they will ever be in touch with humans again, even if they are wild animals, because humans are everywhere. Infrastructure of humans is everywhere. So maybe it's not that bad. As an evolutionary biologist, I would maybe not agree, and I would favor a species that is as original as possible, of course, in its behavior, but I know that it's not possible anymore.
So perhaps we can't avoid influencing to some extent, and perhaps that's not the biggest problem that we're facing at the moment. Sort of feeding on from that, the second question on our list talks about zoo breeding programs, which I know some of you are going to be more familiar with than others, but asks, are our current breeding programs designed to ensure the survivability of species in the wild? That is, are we selecting and breeding animals with the ultimate goal of releasing them back into the wild? Or currently, are we still making sure that we have enough animals in captivity to reach a sustainable population? I guess there's a difference between building up a sustainable zoo population and breeding animals that are fit to re-release back into safe habitats. Which one are we doing, do we think? Who'd like to go first on that one?
Well, I can't really say something specifically to this, but there's a certain bird, the black-capped Atricapilla, Mönchsgrasmücke, what is the English name? Sylvia atricapilla, that is now changing its wintering area, going to the southwest of Great Britain. And the only reason is that they are feeders. They are feeded there in the winter. So they react and they change their wintering place. So we don't have natural conditions.
Who wants to go next?
So personally, I believe that at the moment the question whether we are maintaining sustainable populations is a big issue. I don't have much insight into the process that happened in the US, but the sudden drop of, I don't know how many percent, 20 to 30% of the SSPs into something else sounded a lot like we're cutting loose of breeding programs where we think they might fail, so we're cutting loose of them before they do, and that means it doesn't occur under our brand. I'm not sure whether that's the right interpretation or not, because I haven't heard anyone talk about this. But to keep populations that are not geriatric, but that are reproducing, I think is a real challenge at the moment and an important aim. And I would think about that before I would think about whether I'm breeding the right animals for re-release. The first thing is make sure that you have populations that will be sustainable for the next 30, 40 years.
Yes, I fully agree. And I would add another point. I remember that a few years ago, I think the cat special unit of the IUCN released a paper that in lions there are only 2 subspecies. Before it was 8 or 9, and people are debating, and we don't need to discuss what exactly is a species, and a subspecies it's even more complicated. And I am not a zoo person, but I guess that these breeding programs, they are really detailed, and they are cautious about also avoiding any hybrids, yeah, like in the past. In zoos sometimes there were, by accident, or also people were willing to produce hybrids. I think it's more important to have, for my example, the lion, a population in captivity that shows the highest possible genetic diversity we can achieve, because only this kind of species or population would be fit enough, in my opinion, to survive one day maybe in the wild when you have to release them. And we shouldn't care about subspecies in lions anymore. Yeah. I don't know if this is also part of this breeding programs, yeah, which possible subspecies are baited. I don't know. Maybe you can tell me, but I think this should be skipped.
I know it used to be. I sat there for a week in Moscow Zoo when we could do such things, going over the entire Waza tiger breeding program and pulling individuals out because we weren't quite sure of their provenance anymore. Yeah. Did you want to come in on that?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I can just make a comment. I mean, I definitely appreciate the perspective on thinking about genetic variation and trying to encourage a focus of that for breeding programs. I'm also not a zoo person, so I'm not as familiar with what's actually happening, but I do know in conservation genetics there's a big debate on first knowing what is the genetic variation in your population, because some species have had very low effective population sizes for a long time, and they have low genetic variation, and the idea is that perhaps they've weeded out a lot of deleterious mutation, and by then introducing new genetic variation into the population could potentially be more deleterious than just maintaining the population as is. And so, so there are things to think about. It sort of is species dependent on, and also kind of genetic architecture of traits for thinking about kind of what parts of genetic variation should be increased or preserved or et cetera. So that's kind of an open question.
Do you want to add to that?
Well, what means genetic adaptation? We have a problem, not a problem, we have a fact in Central Europe that there are a lot of bird species that since about 50, 60 years are coming into the cities. I don't know the English name. The German is Ringeltaube or Misteldrossel. These are 2 species that did not live in the cities 60 years ago, but since about 40 years they are coming into the cities. And first, the population was thinking, they learned that it is very easy there, that they don't have animals there, that they have enough food. This was wrong. This was a genetic adaptation, because the Ringeltaube is not in the cities in München, because there was a special trait, genetic founded trait, that made it possible that it went into the cities. So they changed already their behavior. So this is not an original adaptation. This has already an adaptation to human behavior.
I'm still trying to work out whether that was missel thrush and collared dove, but we can work on the translations later. I'm going to sum up from the first 2 questions that it seems that our emphasis is on building up a healthy population within the zoo world. Genetically diverse, healthy as we can get it. And if it isn't perfectly suited for re-release, that's not the biggest problem, I'm guessing, from the panel. that, and as you say, we're not really sure what world we're releasing them into anyway, so not the biggest problem. Healthy population within zoos is the biggest thing at the moment. If you vigorously agree or disagree with that, put a pin in it for now, but don't forget, because your views will be very welcome later on. The middle question is huge. We could do an entire conference just on this. So I'm just going to ask the panel for their overview on this. It's an enormous question. But what role does technology play in shaping future biodiversity? This opens the door for the technologists in the panel. Could biotechnology, artificial intelligence, we had to get AI in there somewhere, or conservation genomics, whatever they are, help us to create a more resilient ecosystem? We're trying to create a more healthy and diverse planet. How do we use technology to help us in 5 minutes or less? Who wants to go first? It's massive.
I think we saw nice examples of how technology can help us for the biodiverse ecosystems, like with the caterpillars that remove plants that we don't want, and putting up fences in an easy way so that you don't have to use slave labor, and paying the salaries from a software system with your computer for the people rather than having everybody come. But that is already what I would see as the technology contribution there for my part.
I don't like the part of the question that we create a more resilient ecosystem. Yeah? But maybe this will be the case or is already happening. So I think that especially AI may help us to understand lessons from the past. As a person working also with fossils and past ecosystems, I think we can learn a lot about specific processes that are taking place, independent if humans are there or not. Yeah, there's some natural selection, evolution, climate changes, which is of course triggered by us. That's for sure. But maybe these results where AI may play a major role, or is already playing a role, may help us to deeper understand these factors and drivers, and that could maybe help us to create something that is more resilient to future pollution problems, climate problems, I don't know. So this is where I see these technologies, independent of any things you already mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think genetics has done a lot, which is mostly I think people think about it in a biomedical context, but I think where genetics can be useful is, and again, going back to what was just mentioned, thinking about processes. There's this idea that we should try to conserve genetic variation, that's important, but we don't actually know for most species what does the genetic variation look like and how is that genetic variation acted on over time. And I think that there are a lot of exciting research projects that people are doing at various natural population sites where they're looking at phenotypes and life history and behavioral traits across different individuals within groups, but also looking at the genetics and which individuals are surviving and which are not, so that we can understand what actually is happening in natural populations, so we can then get a sense of what's happening and what might we want to happen, because the only way we can get what we want to happen is to know how things are actually functioning today. And so I think those technologies are pretty exciting, but I'm also biased because I'm a geneticist, so.
Technology, conservation, is it going to save us?
I think what always is underestimated is how quick, how fast in evolution a genome can be replaced by another genome. You need, when you have 1 million individuals of a certain species, a few, let's say 10 or 20, can replace all the others within 6 and 7 generations. This is always underestimated.
Does anybody else want to come in on the tech? Or shall we? I would just, I said I keep my own mouth shut, but I throw this thought out. My usual comment on step one with Homo sapiens vulgaris is there isn't a problem. And we all know a few of the there isn't a problem fraternity. Step two is there is a problem, but somebody else is going to fix it. And the somebody else's, in our world, often involve government and cops. They're going to fix it at a big high level, so we don't have to worry about it. Tech is the other one. And all of these things have a really important role to play. Technology is incredibly important to humans, and it will be in the future. But this big, complicated climate, biodiversity, global crisis is going to be more difficult, I suspect, and more clumsy than that. But tech's always going to have a part. The other one is that somewhere in the world, and this brings us on to one of our follow-up questions, there is some group of indigenous people, local communities, who know the secret of living in harmony with nature. And they're going to save us on that one, which, again, maybe they do in their own corner of the world, but in a world of 8 billion people, I doubt it. But
Can I add to that, please?
Go on, please.
And so my stance is a little bit more of the conservative, mostly because I'm older, that I agree with you that the promise of technology might be a hindrance to actual action at the moment, because people think, oh, once we know the microbiome, then we will be able to fix things. And that might also be because microbiome researchers say that this is what is going to happen. This is why they need the money. And it might be that just knowing the phenotype might already get us a long way in terms of conservation without knowing its microbiome, for example. And so I would be very conservative of what technology needs to be done as opposed to what would be a common sense thing to do already.
Absolutely. Oh, Irina wants to come in.
Yeah, I'm just, it's coming to my mind that also AI could or will play a major role in monitoring. Yeah, monitoring of wild animals, which is now, so we have two projects at Senckenberg where lay people and also me sometimes in my spare time, we try to train an AI software to detect species from camera trap images. Yeah, that sounds very simple, but it isn't. But this can help to further monitor species or animals we release to the wild, or to monitor the still in the wild living existing populations. I think this should be definitely AI driven, because this helps us a lot. Otherwise, all of us need to go out in the field and watch the animals. It's not possible. And it can even help not only counting animals or determining animals, but maybe even also get information about the behavior of animals. Yeah.
Looking at camera trap photos is something that a computer should be good at.
Or satellite, or this has also been used in a very sophisticated study. Anyway, so it's, yeah, I think there are even more applications like only camera trap photographs.
Oh.
Yeah, and I think to add to that from, again, the genetics perspective, there are also different methods that people are employing to do similar sorts of biodiversity assessments, either using things like flies that land on different animals or organisms and then have some of the genetic material in their body. You can extract DNA from those flies, or do just environmental DNA, like wiping leaves, and you can get a sense of what animals have been in a certain area, and so kind of complementing the camera trapping approaches. I think one thing that we talked about earlier was just sort of, there are many people asking many questions in this space from different vantage points and perspectives, and kind of being able to connect these different fields, camera trap, genetics, social science, is really, I think, going to be the thing that moves this space forward, is that interdisciplinarity. Yeah.
Do you want to add, or should we move on? No. Oh, okay. So tech, important. Put a pin in that one. And the last two questions on my main sheet are huge and really interesting, and this is going to get fun. Question one. is preventing extinction always the moral choice? Or are there cases where, and I'm going to put the quotes in here, letting nature take its course is preferable? Over to you.
I guess my question would be is, who are we asking it's preferable for?
A good question. Given the fact that we have only our human lens to look through, let's look at it through our human lens. And
I mean, my perspective is that there have been lots of species that have gone extinct. Nature is not static. Things evolve and change over time, and at the end of the day, it's who has interest in preserving which species, and where do we invest resources and why, on whether we do it or we don't do it, and that's a tough question to answer.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to come in? No? Okay.
Yeah, same here. So I'm not really sure about my opinion, but I would guess just instantly I would say yes, we should try to save all the species. We know, actually, there are plenty of species we don't know, and they may go extinct right now, and we don't even realize deep sea species, for instance. So yes, I think it's our responsibility to try to do our best to save and keep these species, because the higher the diversity, the better we are prepared for future changes in climate, environment, impacts from asteroids also. I don't know, yeah, what will happen in the future. And I think we are not God to decide, let it go or keep it.
Just adding something comes to my mind is about island faunas. So there might be a very good reason why certain species go extinct, for example, due to competition with other organisms. But you preserve some of the older faunas on islands because the other competitors didn't get there yet. And you could either put the new ones on the island and let evolution run its course there as well, or you could say, nah, we keep this border and don't let it happen. It is a little bit like a museum or an archive approach to not let that happen, but I think it is interesting to preserve that and not to accelerate the extinction in that special case by negligence.
There is a question. What defines the quality of a habitat? And my opinion is not that it is untouched and virgin and so on. It is defined by the number of biodiversity. If you want to have a measure for the quality of a habitat, you should define it by the number of its biodiversity.
I guess it's just a thought to throw, and then I'll pass the mic back.
May I add to this?
Oh, go on.
But in turn, this means there are habitats, like a glacier, for instance, that has less quality than the jungle. Although maybe in the glacier there are some microbiomes or whatever that live there, tiny creatures that are also, they should also survive. So you may be right in terms of biology, yeah, there are differences, but in terms of this question here, I think we should save both.
The best habitats in Germany are the cemeteries. The famous journalist Josef Reichholf said once, this is an interesting sentence, when I would be visited by an American bird watcher, and he is here only one day, and he wants to see the biggest number of birds in one day, I would lead him into the center of Berlin.
Take him to the cemetery. I was going to ask, and we can ask all of us, I guess, so we won't go out to the audience just yet. But out of all the species that are critically endangered now, that are potentially facing extinction? Can we think of any that are facing extinction because of natural reasons rather than human ones? And if they're all facing extinction or critically endangered because of human activity, I guess it's a human activity to try and look after them, but perhaps not.
I think as an academic answer, you have all these papers that investigate what are the characteristics of species likely threatened by extinction and its body size. So you could say, okay, being large in the presence of Homo sapiens evidently is not the best idea to ensure your survival. Having long reproductive turnover rates, like the parasitoctals, they're basically gone compared to the artiodactyls. The Afrotheria, all the Afrotheria with their incredibly long gestation periods, probably not a good idea. So you could characterize species by why they are more on the verge, or large taxa, of extinctions than others. The question is, did they have it coming, or do we nevertheless preserve them, you know? And if that is not compromising something else, why not preserve?
And that takes us very neatly on to the next question, so I'll sort of jump ahead. But again, a huge question, and kind of feeds on. Should humans prioritize species that have higher ecological or economic value over others? Controversial in the extreme.
We can't protect all the animal species in the same way. It is obvious that to serve the survival of the crane and of the black stork, that is more important than to support the survival of a nematode in my flower case.
I disagree. I'm not a big fan of worms, more on mammals, but maybe not in your flower pot, but in the soil, the animals living there in the soil are very important. Without a healthy, proper soil, you don't have plants that feed other animals, yeah, insects, etc. So I think you're right in the sense that we cannot save them at all the same time. So we have to rely on specific species, and there are already strategies like umbrella species, keystone species, flagship species you can use also to promote the protection. Yeah? But at the same time, you will also help other species that are not that catchy, like the stork.
But this should not be übertreiben. We have lost in Germany, particularly in the western part of Germany, the white stork in the 70s. It was almost away from everything. Now it is there again. But it is completely wrong to say that the white stork has an important role in ecology. If it would be extincted, nothing would be happened. We will only lose an aesthetic adventure.
Supplementary question, and then back to you guys. But what constitutes a valuable species?
Who defines it? How to define?
I'm thinking one thing is an umbrella species or a keystone species. Another thing is a valuable human ambassador, giant pandas. Probably the golden forest in China wouldn't really notice if the giant pandas disappeared, but they're a great ambassador for fundraising for it. Another one might be commercially valuable. Another one might be culturally valuable. How do we define it? And as you say, who decides?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we decide what is valuable, and I think there's been a back and forth on which species or some species or all species we should put efforts toward, but at the end of the day, we decide, and most people, I think, can connect with mammals in a way that they can't connect with non-mammals because they're more closely related to us. We can see parts of ourselves in our closely related species, and so we find affinity there. And so I think at the end of the day, humans will always value mammal lives and over other taxa, and we have to decide if we're okay with that or if we're not okay with it. But yeah, we decide.
I would also say most likely this is a case-specific decision that when you realize that something is completely amiss in an ecosystem and it's not a mammal, then you might nevertheless go for it. But as long as it's a question of do we get people involved or not, it's what they get involved with, and then that's good as a start. You won't tell the people that want to preserve the giant panda, you should focus on krill or whatever. But let the krill people focus on krill and the panda people on pandas.
I wonder if there are any cuddly krill in the gift shop. Probably not. I'm going to do one more question from the list because it's quite a specific question and it would be great to hear the opinions of the panel. And then I'm going to throw it open for everybody and we can kick off and kick you out of your post-lunch stupor that you've been enjoying for the last half an hour. What role does indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological practices play in shaping biodiversity conservation? This was the other one where people cling to and think, oh, we've got so much to learn. It's something we discuss at Oxford all the time at the moment. How can they be integrated with modern scientific methods? How do we integrate the traditional, the indigenous, and the Western scientific? Anyone?
I mean, I think what we do is we listen to them. I mean, they are people too. They have interests and opinions about things, and the idea that the Western world versus everybody else should be separate is wrong. And so all humans have perspectives on what is important and what should be happening, and so therefore everybody should listen to everybody. It's not a simple thing to do, but
I think it's very important to take the knowledge of these people into account because they know where species still occur, where the populations can be found. Maybe the trails they use, the plants they feed on or the animals they feed on, and they help to better understand the biology of species that might be highly endangered or very rare.
I would say more probably is a Western attitude, but if it works, it works. If it contributes, it contributes, and if it's just, it is another myth, then it's another myth. And you must make that decision on the case-by-case basis.
You want to come in?
The last word?
Yeah, have a last word.
I think we should consider to save all the species that are really endangered and to prevent that they die. And we should not give the first preference to untouched nature, because the whole world will become a zoo. What is not good about the zoo are the cages and so on when the animals are in a prison. But on the but if we forget this consideration, the whole world will become a kind of zoo.
Thank you very much, all of you. I will add a footnote to the indigenous knowledge question, which is where I said before, it's one of those hopes that some people cling to, that somebody in the world knows some secret that the rest of us don't, and I personally don't think that's probably likely. But there is an enormous amount of evidence that local knowledge plays a huge part in protecting local ecosystems, and probably more importantly, locally led conservation interventions are demonstrably more successful than ones that are led by people who are not from the local area. So listening to people, yeah, I completely agree, but also probably take that one step further. and the more locally led the work is, the more effective it tends to be. Did you want to come in? Or you were...
No, I think this is a completely westernized attitude that you measure what is effective and then you go for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would subscribe that. If locally is more effective, then you go locally. If globally is more effective, go globally. It doesn't.
Again, I only have my own lens. I'd love to see through other people's lenses, but by definition. Thank you so much to all of the people sitting up here. You are not released. But we can open things up to the rest of the room, I think. There is an enormous amount of IQ sitting staring at us at the moment, and it's about time you guys came in on some of this. We've had the points that we've been talking about here in why are we conserving in zoos, for what purpose, what matters and what doesn't. We've talked briefly about technology and how that might help us moving forwards. And we've talked about the big decisions about preventing extinction versus letting it happen, and tied in with that, what do we value and what we don't. And then we've talked a little bit about the role of indigenous and local knowledge in some of these decisions. There's a last question on here, which is, in your opinion, how should the role of zoos evolve in the future to ensure they contribute positively to biodiversity without overstepping the bounds of natural processes? I open that one up to all of you, plus the stuff that we've been talking about up here. We still have another nearly half an hour, and you guys have really big brains. So let's solve some of these problems. Who'd like to kick us off? Yes. Have we got mics at the back, or shall I just run around with a microphone? I shall. Oh, well, that's good of you. Can I grab the other one? I'll steer, but I'll pass it around.
So one of the questions you offered to the panel was if the populations we have in zoos, if we are managing them for, and if you can help me to release them back into the wild, or to just keep them around, right? And the thing is, I think these managed populations, and the part of the managed is what we all are trying to do, and it's not a perfect process. Yes, there are selection of traits and so on, but for me, the way I see it is like these populations, they are like a tool that we have to buy time, because you cannot even manage the population to be released back into the wild. Like it's something that you have to keep in mind and not waste that opportunity and that potential, but you don't know when that will happen, because it's all dependent if there will be quality habitats or not for that species. But in the meantime, when you have to first clean the mess, you have to solve wars, political instability, environmental degradation, poverty, etc. These things can take decades, even centuries to solve. So these populations is just, let's say, a last resource to buy that time that we need to clean the mess until we can actually send them there again. So that is my perspective of what these zoo populations are for. Of course, it's not the only. You have all the rest: public engagement, communication, education, scientific research, all of that. They are not a single thing. They are a multitude of values and uses, and that's why they are so important.
I'm trying to think of some really challenging way to bounce that back, and I can't because I agree with all of it. Other people?
I've got a slightly different opinion, perhaps, about the use of captive populations. If you look at zoos, I think the main thing they can do in comparison to other nature conservation-minded organizations is bring people to animals. So sort of create that interest, that love, that passion for wildlife. And even if you have a population that is not suited for the wild, or is of a species that doesn't need a backup population, that is still very important, because you bring people to animals and the other way around. And we are all here a little bit, I think we're all wildlife loving people, so for us it's very natural to care about that. But for most people who come to the zoo, they just come for a nice day out, and to give that connection to them, that might in the end maybe be even more productive than the whole breeding program, what we've been talking about.
So just to say that I agree with everything he said, and my first opinion was more, we as the ones that are responsible for these populations, it's how I see it. However, if we extend it to a more society, broader vision of what zoos are important for, I totally agree with you.
So I'm also agreeing, but for me there is a question that develops from what you just said, and that is people like to be close to animals, interact with animals, and to what degree do we use that, or do we target that as the aim of the husbandry setting that we have, and to what degree do we just say this is a side effect? That is it a side effect that people can come, look at the animals, have a good time, cool, or is it our main goal? And for me, the issue crystallizes in, do we want animal petting encounters? Because whenever I have read about research where you create the strongest bonds and you have the biggest educational effect, that's when people can actually touch an animal or feed an animal. And is it cool to use that? Or should it be the other way around, a moment where you educate people that if you really respect animals, you leave them the fuck alone and don't think you can go and touch them and feed them whenever you want. These are two different aspects. I don't know the solution to that. Personally, I always cringe when I see these encounters where people do something, because I have the feeling the animals are not completely respected. But maybe there's real evidence that these encounters increase the respect for animals in total. I don't know.
I would like to add my personal experience in the Frankfurt Zoo with Petra. It's a hippo. She's very old and she will certainly be not released in the wild. So I think these encounters with petting animals may be a good option, if possible, yeah, with those individuals that will be certainly not part of a group of animals that will be released. So you maybe should distinguish between the individuals in a zoo, or this might not happen in each zoo, only in a few and only with 1 or 2 species. Yeah? But I would say yes, at least for me and my family and people I know, it makes a difference if you simply watch an animal on TV, for instance. So this is why I think that zoos are really important. I know there are other people out there who have a completely different opinion about zoos. To meet these animals from distance or even very close is very important to make people aware of what's going on in nature and with species that are highly endangered. And sometimes an encounter with a specific animal, like in my case, hippos, yeah, they're nice, they're interesting, not my favorite species, but after I met Petra and I was allowed to feed her and touch her mouth, it was very special. And maybe I think about my opinion about hippos now.
Just yell at me if you want to say anything.
Yeah, I actually had 2 very different perspectives on how zoos can contribute. I think the first one is more from a population management perspective, also relating to the first 2 questions about the genetic adaptations. And I think in the end, the most important thing there is what's already happening, the focus on maintaining genetic diversity in breeding programs. And that also allows them to be able to adapt to wild situations if ever needed. So I think, that's just a short comment there. And then on a more broad scale relating to the, more the conservation optimism talk and more the broad scale human behavior, I think zoos indeed do have a big role to play there. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but just this this large-scale change can really, be a big thing there. And yeah, I think in some Dutch zoos, there's already, they can be quite progressive also, for example, in their food assortment, where they have mostly plant-based food. And of course, you cannot just switch from one day to the other because there will be a lot of restraints from people. But I think, it's a bit hard to justify talking about conservation, land use change, agriculture, and then have a meat-based diet in the zoo. And then also, these interactions with animals, but then it feels a bit hypocritical because I think we've already had a few times now here at this conference, and maybe we will again go to the lemurs to feed them, and then we will all have happy faces and we like it as well, right? So, it's a bit double, I guess.
I'm just going to throw out, we were talking at lunchtime, there's 800,000 visitors last year, I think, to Hodenhagen. So if the education team, which I think is also the conservation team, can hit 10% of those people, that's 80,000 people. Given that, to my limited knowledge, that team is 2 people, I think it's Ruth and Philip, that's 40,000 people each. There's not many people have that potential impact. Your potential as a zoo educator, zoo conservationist, zoo communicator, absolutely amazing. The other thing, I played around with those lemurs in the enclosure over there last year, and it was one of the happiest moments of my life. So, yeah, go lemurs.
I want to also pick up on what you said about the slow changes that happen, for example, in zoo restaurants. And for me, that is a very nice example of how progress happens. It's not like we take a stance, everybody has to be vegan, and now we do. But you can see stuff like this happening slowly because one zoo does it, and then the next zoo does it, and another one does it. At our university, for example, they really introduced a day where at the canteen, where we all go, you only have vegetarian stuff. So every Monday, you don't have any meat product. And you know, maybe Switzerland is a little bit ahead of other places, I don't know, but it worked. There was no big ruckus. But if you would have done that 10 years ago, at least the place where I work, that would have not worked. But to do these things in a gradual way, it comes back to what John said, that at some stage, mankind will have become more sustainable because we will adapt. And the question is, at the moment, do you want to be one that lags behind, or do you want to be part of the group that leads in front? And it's not, you have to save the world. If it's 1.5 degrees and then we're all doomed, then you get frustrated. But it's like, yeah, you know what? Let's also go vegetarian for a day or so, and then you are just part of the pioneering things without having all the burden of saving everything. Just being part of the advanced group.
Yeah.
A personal experience from a private zoo in Germany, in Bell. The restaurant decided to provide only organic food, and they realized that a sausage or a schnitzel then would be so expensive. And imagine a family with 2 kids or 3 kids that's coming in, they would pay so much money, it makes no sense. And then they decided to go vegetarian for this, and I think this is also a very good option and choice. You can, if you want to eat meat, you can do this at home, in a restaurant, elsewhere, but it's totally fine to provide a great diversity of vegetarian food, and I'm not vegetarian. Yeah.
Other people.
Also, English, sorry. So I'm not a scientist at all. I'm a field guide / ranger, working as a safari guide in Southern Africa, in Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. And of course, I see a lot of things going on there. And I like stories like we heard yesterday about Kai, this rhino that was actually rewilded in the Tosha National Park. And well, that was a big single contribution to, from a zoo. And there were other examples in the past where actually rhinos were very important part of zoos to protect them, to even establish a bigger populations. In the 50s and 60s in South Africa, there were the last rhinos actually waiting for the extinction. And then they came up with a big program, including a lot of zoos. And so that's where I started to see that there can be a very good cooperation between zoos and the so-called wilderness in those countries. Of course, I understand your point. I mean, seeing a national park, like, I don't know, did you refer to the Lake Nakuru National Park in Kenya, or with the lions next to the cars, or which one do you mean? Yeah.
This was in different national parks of Kenya. And the ranger advised me, if you want to see lions, look where there are accumulations of cars. Then you see a lion.
Yeah, but still, the situation for me, from my point of view, is, I mean, I see a lot of national parks. I know a lot of national parks down there. And I even in those ones that are actually fenced, like in South Africa, there is no, well, only a small chance, but regular. The norm is to have all the dangerous animals behind fences. So, but in national parks like Kruger National Park, which is 20,000 square kilometers, if you go in there, I mean, if you approach the park, you might see fences, but if you go inside, you just you don't feel the fences anymore. You really get the feeling of being in the wild. But what I have in my mind, I mean, in Tanzania and Botswana and Namibia, there are a lot of places with open corridors, no fence, so really for the wildlife to roam freely. And so that's what I have in mind when I think about shaping biodiversity nowadays. I mean, of course, I see the point that humanity, it was mentioned several times this morning, is growing like crazy. And there is actually no real chance to probably keep this nature how it was like 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. But what I actually see on the other side is there is space that is obviously occupied by humans more and more with growing populations, no question at all. But the experience, my experience down there is land is taken, nature is taken anyway. Anyway, the question is, what are we going to use it for? So whenever it comes to economy, so when they take a part of land, if they don't take this part of land and make it a national park, then they use the same land for mining or agriculture and so on. So for me, one very important part from a point of conservation, sorry, is of course to make sure that the nature that we still have, that we can save this nature, as much of it as possible, to make sure that there are still spaces for already troubled wild animals. And if we can do it, if we can really influence this, then of course it doesn't make zoos. We will still need zoos, like like a good cooperation partner, because we can't prevent animals from getting at least close to extinction. But we have examples, once again, the rhinos. If you think about all Kenya again, all Pecheta, where you have the last two northern broad-lipped rhinos, and where scientists and once again several zoos in the past helped to build up, to establish a kind of gene pool to try now with the last 2 females, by the way, to actually revive this species. So there is still a lot of good cooperation going on where I see chances. But if we get to a last few sentences, if we get to really save nature, or and we take a possible influence, because yes, nature's course is our course. That's the future for sure. But if we can not only let nature grow as it wants, as you once again described this morning in your presentation, where you showed pictures from 70 years ago and nowadays. So yes, I mean, if you just let it grow, it's one thing. But what we need is actually a working ecosystem. So if you take influence on nature and you try to keep biodiversity and a floating ecosystem, then you might not even think about which animal do we have to save. Then you can really take key animals, so key species, and with that, I mean, if you have a working ecosystem, there are many of the smaller ones that just survive. And you don't have to think about how do we save them.
Thank you so much. And it's lovely to hear a non-European perspective on this, because the worldview is very different if you've still got a lot of biodiversity out there and a lot of space. Does anybody want to come back on that, or shall we go? I'm looking for more hands. We have about 10 minutes maximum left, and there are people who haven't expressed an opinion yet. Don't tell me you don't have opinions. Thank you.
Hi, just like maybe general comment on what all of those questions that you answered. I'm not gonna maybe trying to answer them, but comment on them. The first was about the genetic traits, whether there are difference in between zoos and the captive population. So only my observation from penguins would be that, and it hasn't been researched yet, but I think it's an interesting thing to study, that from my observation, like European population is slightly smaller in general than the wild ones. So there's this, just comment on that. That might be very interesting to research why it's that happening. And on top of that, when we're talking about the reasons to keeping, let's say, for example, penguins in captivity, the EP is talking about them being the resources for future reintroduction, so on. But since I've been in Africa now, I've heard that there's no way that European or American penguins are coming to Africa for the rewilding. So what do we do with this now? I mean, we've been telling our public, the visitors at the zoo, that they serve as a for future generation, for restoration projects, which we know now that it will be not happening. So just a comment on that. Sorry. And then also when it comes to deciding which species to save, again, with penguins, it's easy to say, let's save the penguins, because when you look at the penguins, everyone loves penguins and they are charismatic and they are easy to advertise to our public. But we can use them because they are also key species for the whole environment. So what South African organizations are focusing are establishing the no-take zones, which are obviously not only benefiting penguins, but everyone else. They're benefiting other seabirds, because the penguins are the species that are bringing the fish from the depths into the shallow water, so the other diving birds can fish as well. With the no-take zone, we're obviously protecting fish, and we have more to replenish for people to fish in the later years. So in general, it's very difficult to decide what species to save, but if we start with saving ecosystems and biodiversity, I think it's the important approach. And also, there was this question, how we decide, and who decides? Well, as someone already said, like, we decide. There's so many of us here, and we can just focus on whatever we think that it's important. And I think, as someone also said, everyone's opinion is important, so if we try to work on all of the things that we want to, we can just do a lot of good work. And just thank you.
Comments from people? Ah, one more comment from the lady in pink.
I'm just going to try to express a thought that popped into my head when he was talking. Yeah, exactly who decides, how do we know which species to rescue or protect? I think it comes down to the idea of Werner in terms of habitat. So people tend to save the things that are closest to them. So if you see campaigns for, let's say, breast cancer, people care, but when it's impacting someone that you know personally, then you really care. You put the money forward, you push for the research, you maybe go on the news or write a blog about it, but it becomes something really personal and it really is ingrained in you. So I think what would help a lot in this type of situation is communicating with the local communities. What do you need? What's disappearing that used to be there that was helpful for you and your community? And also then from there, you can decide, okay, this species is really important, like the dung beetle. In Germany, it's not that important, but maybe in some part of Africa, it really is important. Or, you know, the bees are generalized for the whole world, but in that particular area, is it important for to have the bees there? But you just have to ask these questions. So I think that's the way it could go from my perspective. Just figuring out what's missing in that area that used to be there. Is it possible to get it back? What do we need to do? Are there people to talk to? Are there funding opportunities available? But just really get to the soul of it so that the people there care, and then they want to do something about it. Yeah.
Thanks, Edu. Okay. There's probably chance for one more question or comment or idea or speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. Then I get the last word in, which is just to say, in most places, particularly in Europe, different in South Africa, where else are you going to go where you can spend several hours surrounded by people who are sharing their love of wildlife, and you get to see some of that wildlife, and you get to learn about it, and you get to learn about how we can look after it better, how important it is for your lives and your family's lives, and how it all feeds in. You go to the restaurant and everything's locally sourced and sustainable and mostly plant-based and blah, blah, blah. And you're just surrounded by an atmosphere of love of wildlife, conservation, beauty of nature, sustainability. That whole conversation is going on quietly all the time you're there. If you can't get that from a modern conservation-focused zoo and relevance to the local community, as you so rightly say, where else are you going to go? It's a modern, I think, a modern zoo can be absolutely amazing. I'm a huge fan. And if you can hit 40,000 people each, its conservation potential is unmatched. Guys, do any of you want to? Then I'm just going to say a huge thanks to all of you first, because you've been brilliant and it was after lunch, so massive respect. And a huge thank you to our 4 panelists who have shared their expertise with us this afternoon. Thank you so much. And I think... Oh, thank you very much. How long have we got? Is it 10 minutes break?
Yes.
We have a 10-minute break, and I think you're all expected back here by 15:15. Yes. Excellent.
But we are starting now with a poster by Dr. Andreia Garcês from the University of, Tras-os-Montes and Alto Douro in Portugal. She's talking about the post-mortem findings in a zoological collection in Northern Portugal. And I hope we have a connection now.
Hello to everyone. My name is Andreia Garcês. I'm a veterinary at Wildlife Rehabilitation Center at University of Tras-os-Montes and Alto Douro in Portugal, and I will present post-mortem findings in the zoological collection in Northern Portugal. Before I start the presentation, I just want to warn everyone that I will present some pictures of necropsies, so they are a little sensible for those that don't want to see that image. So, regarding post-mortem examinations, they are very important for the health management and conservation of zoo animal populations. This exam can provide very important information regarding the causes of death, new disease that appear, and overall health of the animals in that collection, and how you can improve their management. Necropsies can provide information regarding infectious disease in some species. Sometimes we don't know that they have genetic disorders in that collection, and environmental and nutritional issues that are affecting their welfare. It is important also these informations because can help to improve care protocols, improve husbandry practice, and minimize the disease transmission between different populations of animals in the collection. Also provides important advanced scientific research, shedding light on specific health challenge to each species, reproductive biology, and adaptations. So in this work, we are presenting some cause of death during a small period of time. It was about 6 months of animals that died on a zoo collection in Northern Portugal. So most of the animals that died during this period were mammals, about 38%, followed by 31% that were reptiles, and birds 19%. Fish and insects were also present in 6%. No amphibians were found or were euthanized during this period. Regarding the species that we observed where the post-mortem was performed, we had a great variety of species. You can see in this table the species that were examined. You have, for example, Ursus arctos, brown bear, the Panthera tigris, the Siberian tiger, other species like bats or species of turtles like Testuda grica. Regarding the post-mortem, we'll present only a few cases, some of the most interesting cases because it's a short period of time. Regarding fish and insects, there was one animal of each class. Regarding fish, this was a red-bellied piranha that we didn't find the cause of that because she was predated post-mortem, as you can see in the image, by the other elements of the group. Indian ornamental tree spider was also found dead in their habitat. We observed cachexia and loss of hairs in several areas, but she was already in a level of mummification that was hard to identify the cause of that. We think that probably was because she was already a very old individual. Regarding birds, two of the most interesting cases that we observed were the case of a Carolina duck that was a sudden death in the lake, and when we did the post-mortem, we found an interventricular air sac fibrosarcoma near the heart that was compressing the vase. Other one was a Darwin rhea, was an animal that already had some age. He presented to the post-mortem with rhabdomyolysis, septic arthritis that was already been falling, and hematomas probably from collisions due the animal be stressed and probably he got scared and ran out to a wall. Regarding reptiles, a mangrove monitor was found also dead in their enclosure. It was a very old animal also. Morton, we find stomach with gravel. He had some burns around the body. We think he was an animal that came from other zoo. We don't know very well the story, but they were already very old, scars. He had polydermatity at the beginning of one, and present a mass in the oral cavity. The animal had already have a mass when he was alive. That was removed a few years ago, but at post-mortem we saw that she started to grow again. Bear dragons also in that during that months appeared dead. These was animals that were born in that year. These were juveniles, then end up died for cachexia, desertation, and gastric stasis. Regarding mammals, one of the most interesting cases was these hippopotamus, African hippopotamus, that was around 20 years old and died due to volvulus intestinal. In the case of a Bennett wallaby, he was found post-mortem cranioencephalic trauma and blood aspiration. We think that was a fight between the group, and the animal ended up getting very hurt and eventually die. So to finish, it is important each of these deaths that we perform the post-mortem of the animals, although they are in captivity, not only to find out what was the cause of the death, but it's important because it provides very important information that we can use, for example, in animals that are in the wild. And we can, with that information, try to refine the conservation efforts and welfare in the future of these animals in the zoo or sanctuaries. Necropsies are very crucial to understand the health and aging of animals. It's important also that the persons that do the necropsy have some practice doing this to understand what they are seeing and to take out the maximum information that they can. In our case, most of the animals end up dying because of old age, and they had other problems associated to old age. Unfortunately, that usually is very common in these animals in captivity. Many of these lesions we would not see in wild animals. They can provide information regarding the chronic and degenerative conditions and effects of long-term captivity. And this is important because it's information that can help to improve their life in captivity. These evaluations also can contribute to enhance geriatric care, identification of previous overlooked conditions, and to establish health benchmarks for both wild and captive populations. Thank you very much. I hope you like. If you have any questions, please.
Yeah, thank you very. Thank you. Am I here? Yes. Thank you very much. Any short question, maybe? No? Okay. Thank you, Andrea, for this beautiful presentation. We are continuing then with a presentation by Margarida Plácido from the Royal Zoological Society of Antwerp in Belgium and the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona in Spain. The title of her presentation is Safeguarding the Future, Monitoring Cinereous Vultures Welfare in a Breeding Center.
Okay, so good afternoon to everyone. I just want to start by thanking the conference organization for giving me the opportunity to do this presentation. And so our study is about safeguarding the future, monitoring cinereous vultures welfare in a breeding center. So our study focused on the cinereous vulture, a species that is globally near threatened with a decreasing population trend. One of the measures used to aid the conservation of the species is restoring wild populations by translocating individuals, with some originating from breeding centers. Compromised welfare can negatively affect the captive individual's reproduction and survival of released vultures. Therefore, evaluating welfare in breeding centers is very important for both the individual itself and the species' long-term conservation. Behavior and user space analysis are animal-based tools that give direct information about the individual and that can aid welfare assessments. There was no activity budget available for the cinereous vulture at the time of the study, and this is available tool to use as a baseline for behavioral analysis, allowing for detection of behavioral irregularities. So our first objective was to develop an activity budget and analyze if it could potentially be used as a standard for the captive population. Our second objective was to determine if behavior and user space analysis could detect potential welfare issues in a zoological institution breeding center. So the study was done on 12 vultures at the cinereous vultures breeding center at Zoological in Belgium for a total of 27 days. The vultures are sensitive to human presence, therefore remote methods like live video cameras were used to collect data. An ethogram and an enclosure map were used to gather this data. Here is just an example of what we observed. In this case, these two vultures were gathering branches to build the nest. So from this data, we developed the activity budget. For the behavioral analysis, using the activity budget as a baseline, the standard deviation, and the individual's percentage of time spent in each behavior, dispersion graphs were developed for each vulture. And finally, for the user space analysis, we created heat maps of each vulture's location. So for the first objective, the activity budget, we were able to develop one from the results. And as you can see, by far the most frequent behavior was perching, followed by breeding and locomotion. The activity budget developed did have similarities to those of other members of the species family, and it allowed for the detection of behavior irregularities in the study subjects. To refine the activity budget, it will be important to have data from 24 hours observations with a larger sample of vultures and throughout the entire year. As a conclusion for this objective, through this study, it was possible to develop an activity budget that could be used as a future reference for behavioral analysis of the captive population. By using these as a baseline, anomalies can be detected, helping the identification of potential welfare issues. So for objective 2, which were the animal-based welfare tools, we identified behavior irregularities as well as irregularities in spatial localization, and also the potential need to improve the enclosure and its surroundings. We have a few examples of our results. Regarding behavioral analysis, in this first example, there is a vulture with clear lower levels of perching behavior, which is the most frequent behavior of the species. So this is an irregular percentage of a normal behavior. So this is a video of the vulture. It had health issues that prevented him from flying and perching as well. Here is another example. In this case, this is an abnormal behavior, which is copulation with an object. And this was displayed by only one of the vultures, and the object was the edge of the nest. A possible reason for this behavior could be to offer sexual reinforcement to the male if it cannot display reproductive behavior with the female due to her not being sexually receptive or is aggressive. Then we have some examples of the use of space. In this heat map, there is a preference to the left side of the enclosure, which might be due to the caretaker's house being on the right side of their enclosure, so they were avoiding and going to the other side. In this other example, there is no use of the higher levels, which is not normal, as this is a species that spends most of its time perching in higher spaces. This heat map is from the same vulture which I just showed before the video, which had no perching behavior. So both the behavior and user space analysis identified irregularities and were valuable practical and non-invasive tools for detecting welfare issues in the breeding center. Recognizing and addressing these issues will improve the captive vulture's welfare, consequently their reproductive outcomes and behavior range. And finally, it will contribute to the cinereous vulture conservation program success. Thank you so much. Here is also the QR code to the published research article from this study, if you want to have access. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have a question from here, from the audience? No. Okay. Then thank you very much. And yeah, thank you, Margarita.
Thank you.
Margarita. We're continuing with the next presentation, the last online presentation for today. So the live presentation. Next stop is England. Helen Reynolds from the Manchester University, Metropolitan University. She's talking about the importance of a pack social structure to conservation management of African wild dogs. And I hope that there is a connection again. Yeah, we still can't hear you, Helen. Are you okay, or would you be okay that we use your recorded version? Yeah, she just texted. Yeah, that's okay? Okay, then we have now the recorded version of her presentation. But thank you anyways for your effort, Helen, and now we are playing your record.
My name is Helen Reynolds, and today I'm going to talk to you about the importance of pack social structure to the conservation management of African wild dogs, Lycaon pictus. This research took place in Namibia in southern Africa, and each slide depicts each section of the poster for self-reading, but I will present additional information verbally. So the African wild dog, Lycaon pictus, also known as just wild dog, are endangered by the IUCN, but they are actually critically endangered within Namibia. The aim of reintroduction is to form self-sustaining, viable populations within their natural range to improve population size and also to restore the natural ecology. And pack stability is important because it can affect reproductive success. Wild dogs are matriarchal, so that means decision-making and leadership are regarded to be by the one breeding female, formerly known as the alpha female within the pack. So our Shakespeare pack comprised of 3 individuals. So we had Namib, the breeding male, and he did have previous experience of hunting and predator avoidance. And then 2 unrelated female siblings, and that was Sahara, the breeding female, and Atacama, her sister. And the 2 females had no prior experience of living free. The data was collected before the release at the Nankuzé Wildlife Sanctuary, during the acclimatisation period in a camp, and the first 3 weeks after release onto the Timbila Nature Reserve, and that was in 2021. I then used scan sampling, and that looked at an individual's proximity or distance to one another, and that was noted against 5 generic behavioural categories. And once released, the dogs were tracked on foot every other day via their GPS collars, and this analysis represents the data from the resting behaviour at 0 metres, or touching distance. So I looked at touching distance, or close resting behaviour, and that is because it's thought to actually be a key behavioural indicator that the pack is well integrated and more likely to reproduce successfully in the future. The data was then transcribed, and I then performed social network analysis using R. And so what is social network analysis? And here we can, through those behavioural observations, the social structure of a pack can actually be visualised using social network analysis. So if we look at the diagram, the strange diagram at the bottom of the page on the right hand side, we have some circles, and those are the individuals within the group. And then we have some lines connecting them, and those lines are the associations between the individuals. And the thicker the edge or the line, the greater the association or the frequency of individual interactions. Our social network analysis also produces a series of metrics, so that's our statistical data, and that can help inform the structure and organisation of a group of animals. And the metrics that I focused on in this poster are closeness, eigenvector centrality and density, and they measure the key players and the cohesion of the overall social structure of the pack. So I had a total sample size of 372 data points, and that was collected over 131 hours of observation, or 37 days at 2 study sites within Namibia. The table shows the social network analysis metric results for that resting behaviour at 0 metres or touching distance of each of the individuals of the Shakespeare pack. And the results are separated into pre-release at the Wildlife Sanctuary the acclimatization period, and also the first 3 weeks post-release onto the 305 square kilometre Timbila Nature Reserve. So key players can be looked at using closeness, and that means who is the most influential individual within the group. And here, the smaller the number, the closer they are, and they have more influence within the network. And also you can use Egan vector of centrality, and that measures how popular the individual is within the group. And here, the higher the number, the more influential they are. Our social cohesion, we can use density, and that measures the social cohesion of the group, and help us understand how connected the network is compared to how connected it might be. So here, the higher the density, the more powerful the network is. So from those results, we could see in the first month of release that the 2 females were less connected to Namib, the breeding male, and as a pack, they were also less connected to each other, and that was from the density metrics. The breeding female, Sahara, no longer had the most influence among the pack during that first month of release, and that's from the Egan vector of centrality and closeness metrics, and actually this changed to Atacama, her sister. The key point is that behaviour is actually flexible, and it actually changes depending on context, situation, experience, adaptability and personality. So influence, leadership and decision making can actually change temporarily, with another individual becoming more influential if they are able to better adapt to a changing situation.
Yeah, thank you, Helen, for this presentation. This was the last online live presentation. This means that the in-persons can now head over to the Savanne, because there is the real poster session happening now. Also with some wine and cheese, of course. So enjoy the wine and the cheese. And the posters, which were pre-recorded from that poster session, are now displayed here for the online persons. So the online attendees can stay here, where I am now, and have a look at other presentations, poster presentations, from the in-person attendees here. So just hold the line. Yeah, for the online persons, online attendees, we can then continue with the pre-recorded posters. We are starting with the poster of Arne Kalinowski from the Department of Behavioural Ecology of the University in Bielefeld. He's talking about the effects of the enrichment on behavior of zoo-housed porcupines, Hystrix indica.
Hello, my name is Arne and welcome to the presentation of this poster turned into slides about my master's thesis on the effects of enrichment on the behavior of zoo-housed porcupines, which is supervised by Barbara Kaspers from University of Bielefeld and Miriam Göbel from Zoo Zürich as part of her PhD project on small mammal welfare. So we know that small mammals are regularly kept at zoos, but they are understudied with respect to their behavior and welfare. We also know that noise and visitors may compromise zoo animal well-being, and on the other hand, behavioral enrichment can be used to improve promote natural behavior and improve welfare. So we now want to investigate the interplay of these factors in Indian crested porcupines. They live in family groups and naturally forage at night and spend their days resting in underground dens, but luckily in zoos they also show daytime activity, especially around the feeding times. And the main question here then is, does enrichment positively affect porcupine welfare? So how did we tackle this question? We made use of 2 main categories of enrichment. On the one hand, safety enrichment in the form of custom-made tin shacks, and on the other hand, variety enrichment in the forms of olfactory, food-based and object enrichment. Each of those 3 comprised of 7 variants. A few examples are given below, and then we took those enrichment devices into the porcupine enclosures. For that, we divided the enclosures into two sides, each making up 40%, roughly 40% of the area, on the left or the right, and then a smaller neutral zone without any enrichment in the center. And then over the course of 6 weeks per zoo, we applied a random sequence of enclosure setups, including a control, and then different combinations of placements of safety and or variety enrichment in order to investigate different effects. We observed in total 17 porcupines in 4 groups, that is zoos, being Zoo Krefeld, Tierpark Hellerbrunn in Munich, Tierpark Nordhorn and Zoo Osnabrück. A illustration of the sample can be seen on the left side. It was made up of 9 male and 8 female porcupines, both adults and young. And yeah, then over the course of 6 weeks per zoo, we would apply one sequence of treatments and then observe each individual 3 times a day for 15 minutes. And the observations took place between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. in the summer half year of 2024. And during observations, I would record behavior, the enclosure part that the individual resided in at that moment, loudness, number of visitors and dogs. So how do I make inferences about welfare now? Well, by answering a few questions. For example, are there any differences in the behaviors of interest or in space use between the treatments? In order to do that, or to answer that, I built generalized linear mixed models in the form of this one displayed here. So I intend to explain certain behaviors using the treatment and then other covariates such as loudness. At that, I predict positive welfare impacts of the enrichment. That is an increase in natural behaviors such as exploration and also an increased use of those enclosure areas that contained any of the enrichment. And another aspect would be whether the animals preferred safety or variety enrichment. So these analyses are still ongoing, therefore only a sneak peek on the results for now. So what do zoo housed porcupines actually do? And this is for all individuals and treatments combined. And I found that they would rest for most of the time. But when they weren't resting, they could also be seen feeding, exploring their surroundings, or interacting with the different kinds of enrichment. And at that, they spend more time interacting with the safety compared to the variety enrichment, while time share-wise, food-based enrichment seemed to be more popular than object enrichment and olfactory enrichment. I can definitely say that the porcupines engaged with almost all variants of enrichment, and I am currently working on disentangling this behavioral variation and drawing my conclusions on the impact of enrichment. That's it for now, more to come soon. And with that, I would like to thank the Verband der Zoologischen Gärten for funding our project, the zoos involved, and of course you for your attention. I'm happy to take questions or suggestions and look forward to meeting you in person in the future.
Yo, thanks Arne Kalinowski for this nice presentation. The next presentation is from Nick van Ooyvik from the Utrecht University in the Netherlands, also from the UZH at Zurich, Switzerland, and the Safari Park Bexeberg in the Netherlands. The title of the presentation is Offspring Sex Bias in Tree Kangaroo Zoo Populations.
Welcome everybody on my poster presentation here at the International Meeting of Zoo Research, Conservation and Biodiversity. And I'm looking into to male-dominated pouches in zoos, and we're investigating male-biased birth-sex ratios in Goodfellow's tree kangaroo. My name is Nick van Ewijk. I'm a biology bachelor student at the Utrecht University. I'm also a zookeeper at Safari Park Beekse Bergen. Currently I'm doing my graduation project about tree kangaroos, supervised by João Pedro Meireles and Professor Marcus Klaus, both from the University of Zurich. So we're looking into this highly endangered species of Goodfellow's tree kangaroo, and in their breeding program in zoos, they actually observed this huge bias of 14 males being born versus only 5 females in the last 5 years. And as the zoo population is so small, only consisting of about 50 individuals, this might actually be a huge threat to their long-term sustainability and survival in zoos. So we followed the Travis and Willard hypothesis, which hypothesizes that mothers in a good condition or with a higher body weight will actually produce more sons in a polygynous species, as males are the more reproductive successful, meaning they can get more offspring than females over their lifetime. So in 2004, the mechanism behind this was actually discovered, and it was discovered that a high glucose uterine environment actually favors male blastocysts and also decreases female blastocyst survival, meaning that high sugar content in diets of zoos could also be a cause of obesity, and that might be linked to this distorted sex ratio at birth. So our goal was to investigate the possible correlations between maternal weight and birth sex ratio and compare the wild body weight data with the zoo data that we have and see if there's actually a big difference. So this study is supported by the Global Species Management Program of the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and we matched the female body weight together with the conception date of their offspring and see then if the sex was actually correlated with the higher body weight. And we visualized zoo weight data versus wild weight data ranges. So looking into our results, our first graph in the yellow bars, you can see the total births of tree kangaroos in zoos. As you can see, they are kept since the 70s right until now, and the births have never been very high. It's only about 3 or 4 births a year, or 20 births in 5 years. And the blue line is the male proportion. As you can see, in the last couple of years, it's starting to go a little bit up, more male biased, and it's always actually been closer, over 50%. So yeah, there's actually quite a male bias in there. So we looked into the female weight distribution in the green bar, and for our second figure you can see the wild data range, which is 6.5 kilograms to 8.5 kilograms in the wild, and all the black dots are the zoo measurements. So as you can see, there's gigantic cloud in between 10 and 12 kilograms of hugely overweight animals, which is quite concerning. But when we tested this, when we set off the mom's weight versus the offspring sex, you could actually see that there was no difference in the third figure. Both had an average mother's weight of about 9.5 kilograms, which is pretty heavy. But there was no difference, unfortunately. So we couldn't explain that. But when we looked into our fourth figure, it was actually proven that more joeys died in the pouch with heavier females. So the joeys who died before 100 days old actually had significantly heavier moms, which was an interesting result moving forward. So obesity in overweight animals is quite concerning for the future survival. So just summarizing our results, we have seen that historic birth numbers are very low nowadays, averaging about 3 births per year in the total zoo population. And good fellow tree kangaroos in zoos have a much higher body weight compared to the wild, average of about 10 kilograms compared to 6.5 to 8.5 in the wild. And the likelihood of producing male or female offspring could not be explained by the mother's body weight, but heavier mothers are linked to a higher rate of offspring mortality while still in the pouch. So what does this mean? Well, body weight of the mother is not linked to the production of male offspring, contrarily to the suggestion of the tribes in Willard hypothesis. So we couldn't explain it yet with just body weight, but maybe in the future if we investigate other potential factors like diet composition, which for this folivora species is quite a mess, or the age of the mother, or the number of births. This might actually give some more insight into this, into this male bias. And it is necessary, as Goodfellow's tree kangaroo populations are so small, only 55 animals. This represents a big vulnerability for the viability of their program. Thus the urge to increase the number of female births and to reduce juvenile mortality is a great cause to help the species forward. So with this is the end of my poster presentation. Thank you all very much for your attention. If you have any questions, you can search my name on LinkedIn or find my email in the convention app. And yeah, we'll stay in touch. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for this nice poster presentation. And now we've already come to an end. Our last presentation for today, the last poster. This is made by Sara Bosch from the Acoustic Research Institute, Austrian Academy of Sciences, University of Vienna in Austria. The presentation is about the acoustic communication in wild African savanna elephant calves.
Hello everybody, my name is Sarah, and in the next few minutes I will talk you through my poster, which is about the acoustic communication in wild African savanna elephant calves, and this is the research I conducted for my master thesis at the University of Vienna. First of all, I decided to focus on this topic because there is not a lot of literature that covers the acoustic social behavior of elephant calves in the wild. But there is research that shows acoustic features of infant elephant calls correlate with arousal levels. And effective communication is important for young individuals because their survival depends on the care of the mother and the protection of the group in case of elephants. So the aim of my research with my thesis is to investigate the acoustic properties of infant and calf call types in various social contexts. For that, we collected data in the field, specifically in Addo Elephant National Park in South Africa, with a non-invasive all-occurrence sampling method. I am processing the acoustic data we collected with the software of the Acoustic Research Institute, the sound processing tool STX. What you can see here are screenshots of spectrograms from STX of the 3 most common call types among young individuals: roar, rumble, and trumpet. The roar can either be tonal or noisy, or a mix of both, which would be a mixed roar, like this, where the first part is tonal and transitions into a noisy roar. Then there is the rumble, which usually has a lower frequency and is the most common vocalization of elephants in general, which sounds like this. And the trumpet, which is the call one would typically think of when talking about elephant vocalizations. And the calls which you just heard are the ones depicted in the screenshots. For the processing of the audio data, I go through all the calls and assign them the context and identity of the caller, information I collected in the field notes. Furthermore, my colleague and co-supervisor Vesta was with me in the field and simultaneously collected videos. Now, the interesting part and focus of my thesis is the fact that the same call types are used across different contexts, as you can see in the graph. The different types of roars, mixed, noisy, and tonal, depicted in gray and blue, are most often used in agonistic interactions. For example, when a calf is pushed in the crowd and therefore communicating the stress or discomfort. The roar is also common during play interactions. Shown in black, the rumble, on the other hand, functions as a contact call to locate herd members or to greet conspecifics with a little greeting event when joining the waterhole site. Both call types, the roar and the rumble, are used in the context of initiating suckling, so drinking from the mother. And I would like to find out if the acoustic properties of roars and rumbles differ between the various social contexts they are used in. I also need to mention that I'm not yet fully done with annotating and analyzing all the data from our 2 months of field recordings, so there will be more data processed to get a bigger sample size and more robust findings. To summarize, I'm going to present a systematic overview of the wild African elephant infant and calf vocalizations for my finished thesis, where I aim to investigate how each vocalization type differs across social contexts, with a focus on which acoustic feature, if any, could predict the context. And more specifically, I'm going to look into the acoustic properties of roars and rumbles in suckling contexts compared to roars and rumbles in other contexts. With that, I thank you sincerely for your interest in my research, and I hope to keep you updated on the final results. For further information or questions regarding the topic, you can find me at the conference or contact me via email. I'm happy to discuss my work in more detail.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. Also to all attendees which have been part of this hybrid poster session. This is the end of the live streaming event now for today. A big thank you to all online participants. I hope you had a nice time, like joining our conference. Don't forget to vote on the best talk, on best poster, which the link should be available somewhere in the comment section. Okay, thank you very much for this official last poster. But we still have a surprise because we have another last poster. It's by Calum O'Flaherty, and this poster is by the Cheetah Conservation Fund, or about the Cheetah Conservation Fund, which we have supported 3 years ago with the money which we collected 3 years ago at our conference during the silent auction. So, and I hope we can play this recording now in a few minutes. For a few seconds.
Hi, my name is Calum O'Flaherty. I'm the curator out here at the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia. It's been a while since I've presented on a scientific poster, so bear with me. But I'm going to be presenting on our snake aversion training and focus on the case study of our livestock guarding dogs out here in Namibia. Here out in Namibia, we do have a lot of venomous snakes, puff adder, zebra cobra, black mamba, and sadly it is the leading cause of death within our livestock guarding dog program. And so we wanted to change it. We started the livestock guarding dog program back in 1994. Since then, we've placed 798 dogs on farms across Namibia. And these dogs, they get an 80 to 100% reduction in livestock losses, which is absolutely incredible, and why it's probably one of the biggest mitigation, human-wildlife conflict mitigation programs out here saving the cheetah. However, in that 31 years we've been running the dog program, we've lost 141 dogs to snake bite. And that's not including the dogs that have survived or the dogs that have just been bitten and we're unaware of. So we saw that 17% of our deaths are from snake, and we wanted to make a difference. And so last year, for the first time in our history, we started our snake aversion training. I arrived in 2019, and from then I already saw that these snakes were a problem. And so we've been doing a lot of research, working out how best to do this training. Because we had to think these dogs need to have an autonomous response. They're out there in the field alone. They haven't got a handler with them that can reward them for keeping away from snakes. So we had to try and teach an autonomous result. We also had to look at the problems like puff adders. Their camouflage is that they do not have any scent. And so we need to know find out ways how we can overcome this. And we had to look at what sort of training we would do, whether it be aversive learning or whether it be positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is a little bit more difficult because you have to do 150 to 200 repetitions. These puppies, they go out at 11 weeks of age. That's not always possible. Also, we found that some of the dogs would go over and to snakes and to then go away from them to get a response. And that is not something that we can have happening out in the field. So we had to use an aversive learning. And we found that one aversive training can help them generalize all snakes and have a very good response. So how we set up is that we already have an environment ready for this where we can do this training. And it's called our puppy yard. It's about 10 by 15 meters. And in this puppy yard, we've made it look as natural as possible to things that they'll find out in the field. We also have a hide. In that hide, that's where we're going to be staying and giving the aversive techniques so that they don't associate us with the snake. And there's also an escape route for them. And in that pen, there is the trench. And in that trench is where we're going to put the frozen snake, because that's what we're going to be using. We don't want to use live snakes for the welfare of the dogs, but also for the welfare of the snakes, because they are used in other countries. I may be the brave or stupid guy, but I'm the one that handles all the venomous snakes on site. I trust myself handling venomous snakes, but not around monstrous puppies. We didn't want to use the scent of snakes, which is what they use sometimes in the US, because, as I said, the puff adder has no scent, so we need to do it on site as well. And that's where, through our opportunistic research permit, through our genetics lab, we've been able to capture lots of dead specimens from the road to be able to do this training. What we do is we put that snake in the trench, and what we do is we then let the puppies out. Once the puppies have been let out, we then watch their response. As soon as they go into that trench, start playing, that's when we use the aversive techniques. The first one is water. Hose pipe, very simple, and that works very well, we found. We've seen that most times the puppies don't come back after that. If they do come back, we use a vuvuzela, very popular back in the 2010 South African World Cup. Very annoying, works very well as well. And the third one, which is also a little bit embarrassing for me, is the boogeyman, which is where I jump out the hide with a towel, making myself look big and scary. But as I said, luckily the water has worked the best. And we try to get 3 of these training sessions in before they go out to their farms, which is usually around 11 weeks of age. And what has made this so difficult is that we're having to do it on such young puppies, because we don't want to end up with something called a flat puppy, which is something that's now scared of everything, because they're guarding dogs. And so it's very empirical to us that we make sure that the welfare of the dog is looked at for this, but we need to make sure that they do keep away from snakes, because that is our biggest loss. We are then also recording every session so that we can look at the behavior, so we can see that there is differences between the first training session and the third training session. So where the first one, they're all jumping into the pen, jumping onto the snake. By the third session, they see the snake and they stand back. And even with that third session, we'll get the snake out of the trench and make it move around, and they'll still keep away from it, which is awesome. So overall, and in conclusion, no single training method guarantees perfect avoidance. Dogs do generalize those aversive experiences more easily than positive reinforcement, and that single well-timed aversive can be effective but must be used with caution, because as we want to look at the welfare of those dogs. So for us, a balanced method incorporating controlled aversive conditioning with reinforcement and environmental management offers the most effective protection. We won't know for a while how effective this training has been, because we've got to see these dogs out in the field, see the numbers on their survival rates and snake-related incidents. But once we do, we'll have a more comprehensive base and data set for this. But I just want to end this on saying a massive thank you to the Serengeti-Park Foundation that have been sponsoring us since 2019, not just with our livestock guarding dogs, but with our Somaliland cheetahs, our collars for released cheetahs, our bush block project, our environmental education, and camping equipment for our outreach. We are very thankful for all they do for us and keeps us going with what we're doing in saving the cheetah and changing the world. That was it.
Yeah, thanks goes out to the Cheetah Conservation Fund for this last entry for this day. So, and now we are really ending the live session for today. For the online participants, I hope you had a nice, you were enjoying the conference here. And don't forget to vote on the best poster and best talk. And yeah, tomorrow we will see again at 10:20, so be online then. And then we are continuing with another day of beautiful presentations concerning research, conservation, and wildlife and biodiversity. Thank you and good night.